hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Give My Head podcast. I'm Tim McGarry, joined by my comedy colleagues
Michael McDowell
and Damon Quinn.
As you know, ladies and gentlemen, the Give My Head podcast, we cover culture, comedy, and anything artistic and arty, but we also do a lot of politics. We do a bit of serious stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This episode is going to be slightly more serious than normal. Our guest is a wonderful, wonderful man, but I'm going to be honest with you, he's not hilarious. He's not a comedian, though he is genuinely one of the finest investigative journalists on these islands, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted to be joined by the wonderful Mr. Chris Moore. Chris, welcome to the Give My Head podcast. Chris, I don't take this the wrong way, because we always talk about the fact that we're ancient and we're 60 years old, but you could describe yourself as a veteran. Would you describe yourself as a veteran journalist? I've read online that you started, when did you start in the BBC or as a journalist? Did you?
1968.
68?
Yes.
Oh! You make us
very
look
old.
young. Oh, thank God, somebody older is on the programme.
I'm in my 75th year.
Are you 75?
No, I'm 74. But I'm in my 75th year.
Oh, right. So you're looking very well for 75.
Yeah, I don't feel it.
You don't feel it?
Osteoarthritis, sore knees, I need to grip the mantelpiece when I get up from lighting the fire. I can't get up on my own.
Right, we're trying to appeal to a younger audience here. We don't need to hear a list of your ailments. Like, come on now. But you started, what's your background, Chris? Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Ballymolly.
You're Ballymolly, man?
Yeah, and when I was 12 years of age, the family moved to Scotland, and right. I went with them, and that was the formative part of my education was in Scotland, and I was very glad to go there because in Ballymolly I went to Dalriada Grammar School, and in those days grammar schools didn't like football.
Oh, right.
I loved football, but I had to play rugby. And so when I went to Scotland, I went to a comprehensive school and I played football, which was wonderful.
Oh, right, okay.
I did woodwork, I did metalwork.
Right.
I sadly, because I had 3 schools in a 12-month period, I lost language, I lost French, I was doing Latin. And that all went by the board. So I ended up doing woodwork, things that were more practical.
Right. And the football career didn't take off, obviously.
Football was very close to taking off. Right?
Was it really?
Yeah, I played at school, but when I was at school, I played in a semi-professional league. I mean, when I was 16, I was playing up against, semi-professional players for Blairgowrie Juniors. And I remember one fullback, I used to play in the wing, one fullback was thinking of booze, threatened that if I went past him again, he would break my effing legs, which was quite terrifying for a 16-year-old. But I did skin him a few more times, and he was so slow he missed. Yeah. Anyway, I was. You
could probably still get a game for Man United now if you want one.
I probably should.
Yes, well, goalkeeper maybe. We have 2 Man United stalwart fans here.
Yeah. You don't have to bring that up.
Get your reaction to Liverpool's win.
Okay, could we change it? Go on to politics or something?
Can we move on to something light-hearted?
I don't want to say anything about Liverpool on this podcast.
You were in the stadium when Man United won the treble, weren't you?
Yes,
you sat and cried real tears, didn't you?
I was in Barcelona.
Yeah,
and yes, I went with my son and 2 of his former comrades at Queen's University, and we went a week early. Mm-hmm. And we stayed in a place called Blanes, which is about an hour out of Barcelona by train. And so we arrived on the Saturday after having watched United win the FA Cup against Newcastle. We started drinking right away. And I outdrank them for 4 days. I outdrank these young bucks. They couldn't stick the pace. But of course, when it came to the Wednesday of the actual match, I was flagging really badly. And in the grounds of Barcelona University, my son had the bright idea of going to a supermarket, and he bought 2 bottles of vodka, 2 big bottles of 2-litre bottles of water, and 4 or 5 tins of Red Bull. And so we put the water around the plants in the university grounds, then mixed and see that once It's true, it gives you wings. I was flying for the match.
Yeah, maybe they want to sponsor us, actually. They want to Red Bull, we are available. We have proof here that they actually give you wings.
It was very helpful. And then one of
you didn't leave the stadium early like Jody Best did?
No, no chance. No. We always stayed at the end.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm never. I even
never leave.
5-0.
No.
You never leave a match early.
No.
But Jody Best's family did.
He did.
He left the match
indeed,
when you were 1-0 down. Is it Bayern Munich? Is it?
Bayern Munich, yeah.
Yeah, and you scored 2 goals
to go.
Yeah.
And I was still celebrating the first goal when the second one went in. I could sort of just see out of the corner. It was not a. Oh, Jesus, it was. Well, I missed the actual thing.
Right.
But I saw something go into the net from. I didn't know who had put it there.
Right.
I think my sort of thing like that was a bit lower level. Was we went to see for a period I used to go to see the Northern Ireland games. You know, when I was quite young, and when they qualified in '82 to go to Spain, and we'd gone to every match, and the final they needed to get a draw against Israel in the final match.
Oh, right,
yeah.
Oh, I was at that game.
So with that goes, so we get to the place, and we get to the stadium, and he's going.
Not many people get a draw against Israel.
Yeah, that's true. It's very different then. And we got to the stadium. I was going in the days when you could just walk around and find your place. Yeah. So we go, that's a terrible place. I can't see anything there. Come on, we'll move up. And we're moving around. And as we were moving around, and we were like the crowd was massively high, and we were trying to find somewhere to sit. And just as we were walking along behind all these bodies, all I heard was, so there was the one goal in the mission.
It was a terrible match.
It was a terrible match. They got a goal in about 14th minute, and that was didn't see it.
So your football career ended early?
Well, hold on. I'm glad you come back to that because when I was at school in Scotland, I was asked if I would go for a trial. Frank Matthews, whose son Neil played football with me. Frank said, I want to send you, I'm a scout, for Barnsley. I want you to send you and Graham Smith down to Barnsley. Wow. And so that was the plan. And then there was flooding and the pitches were flooded, and that weekend trial was cancelled. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, Frank joined Aston Villa.
Right.
And he came back and he said to my parents, Aston Villa will take him for a fortnight's trial, along with Jake Finlay, the goalkeeper. And my parents said, no, he's for doing his O-levels, he's not going.
Oh, no.
And I thought, bloody hell. So my protest against this slight on my football abilities was to walk into every exam in the O-levels, write my name and score out everything and walk out of the exam. So I failed all my O-levels.
Wow. Your parents stopped you getting a trial
for Aston Villa.
Wow.
And Jake Finlay signed for Aston Villa.
Wow.
So I was watching Jake Finlay on television.
Wow. We had an episode of Give Me Head Peace as a joke. Genuinely, Dad stopped Cal becoming the best footballer in the world he could have got for Celtic, and I ripped up the letters, and there was a whole thing about,
yes.
I'd ruined his entire life.
That's what Jody Best was.
That's what Jody Best was. That actually happened to you. Your parents said that. Sorry. Wow.
It coloured my, let me tell you.
Wow. That's why you're the well-balanced person you are today.
I wouldn't go as far as to say that. I've been very unbalanced about this because I give out to my father. My father died at the age of 93, which is a very worrying thing for me, but that's a different story. And all the years until about 2016 or something, he told me that him and my mother had asked my Uncle Bobby, who was my footballing hero. Uncle Bobby played for Derry in 2 cup finals in 53, 54. He played for Cliftonville for years. He was an amateur, but he was getting a brown envelope on his shoes every time he finished training.
Not at Cliftonville, he wasn't. That's a slur, and I won't have it.
You know about Cliftonville?
Yeah, no, my uncle played for them. My uncle was the manager for them. My uncle scored 171 goals for them. Kevin McGarry. Kevin McGarry was my uncle. And bizarrely, it's a slightly similar story. He could have been a Busby Babe. Just genuinely true. he was a medical student, and the Manchester United came to try and get him, and his father did exactly the same thing and said, "Wise up, no, you're going to be going do your studies, become a doctor. You know, football. There's no money in football, and you break your leg and your career's over." Genuinely, this happened to him. You know?
Wow. Well,
so
a similar thing happened. I mean, I was really my Uncle Bobby, who was my hero, was no longer my hero from 2016 or whenever my father confessed that they'd actually asked him, should he go for this trial? Aston Villa have promised to put him through. I mean, Frank came to the house and said, Aston Villa will put him through university.
Wow.
Just let him have the trial, and they'll make sure he studies.
Bloody hell.
And they still said no.
Oh.
And my Uncle Bobby, who also had been asked to go to Aston Villa, I didn't know this at the time, obviously, but he put his education before going to try and become a professional footballer.
Right.
His was the attitude that determined what happened to me, and I was deeply upset.
Wow. Well, I'm glad we brought it up then.
Yeah. I've got it off my chest.
You got it off. You okay now?
Yeah.
Is your Uncle Bobby still with us?
If I could just, no. 5 minutes alone.
Wow. Well, to be fair, now, it was a loss to football probably, but again, for journalism in Northern Ireland and investigative journalism.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Yeah. You sound like you're pissed off about being an investigative journalist.
I'll tell you something. No. Journalism was my salvation because when I was in Scotland, I worked in Smedley's factory on the pea line. So my job was to stop the tins of peas that were shooting off at I don't know how many a second and falling into this big metal crate, and they weren't to get dented. So I had a belt, kind of belt like a leather belt that a barber would have. Right. So I was guiding these in, and then I had to move one big crate out and get the next one in without causing any spillage. Right. And so at night I learned a lesson. At night I would try to go to sleep, and all I could see coming at me from the end of the bed were tins of peas. So I learned the lesson: get out of factory work.
That's right. Yeah.
And one good thing about Smedley's, right, was we had frozen peas, we had tinned peas, we had tinned strawberries. Now, if you took a couple of tins off the strawberry line and put them on the pea line and vice versa, you could cause chaos. Oh, right. Okay. Which we did. And sadly, I was never present to see some poor housewife doing a sherry trifle and firing in a tin of peas. I just would have loved to have been there to see that.
And do you eat peas?
Yeah, well, I still eat peas, yeah.
So how did you get into journalism then? How did you? Because I will remember. I mean, we're 60. We remember you. I remember you reporting, in the dark days of the Troubles.
Yeah. In 1968, I got fed up. I came back from Scotland and went to school in Lisburn.
Right.
And
came back to Northern Ireland going 68, 69 is going to be a great time.
Yeah, it was just at the beginning of all of that.
What can possibly go wrong?
Yeah, well, I can remember Paisley when I played football in where I lived in Ballymoney in Windsor Gardens. It was a cul-de-sac, but it was on the Dunloy Road, and I remember Paisley and the Reverend Wiley going with a rabble going up into Dunloy one day for a protest of some kind, but then they came back, and Paisley's was very upset because somebody had biffed the Reverend Wiley. His nose was bleeding. It didn't mean a lot to me at the time, but on reflection, fair play to the person who did that. I've lived for years. My father was in the Orange Order.
Right.
I wasn't ever tempted to join the Orange Order.
Right.
Or the Masons. I was asked to join the Masons. I said, when I join the Masons, what if I'm later reporting you guys for doing something wrong? I mean, how can I do that? That's a conflict of interest. Don't want to be. The only thing I ever joined was the NUJ.
The NUJ.
No politics, nothing else. Right. Kept myself clear of all of that. I had my own views, but they never... I'm I feel free to express them more now than I ever did before. But when you work for the BBC, you're not allowed to have any individuality.
Right. When did you join the BBC? What was it?
79.
79.
I was 29 years of age.
29 years of age. You joined.
I joined the BBC. They phoned me on the Friday before I was due to go in. And they said, don't come in on Monday because it's a bank holiday. And there'll be nothing happening. There's only a short news. And I said, okay. So on the Monday, I went with my kids, my wife then, and her mum, who was over from England. And we drove into the Mourne Mountains and we had a lovely picnic, climbed up to the top of this hill. And there were 2 enormous explosions.
Right.
I thought, what the hell's that? Of course, the car radio didn't work. I thought it was a quarry anyway. We got home, but got the kettle on, got everybody into the house, put the 9 o'clock news on. It happened to be the day that Mountbatten was killed.
In Mullockmore, and this is Warren Point, you probably heard.
And Warren Point. Yeah. And I was disgusted. That was my first day in the BBC. Yeah. For the 9 o'clock news, there was 20 minutes about this Lord Mountbatten death. And then, after 20 minutes, it was, and also another news, 18 soldiers died in Mountbatten. And shortly after that, I was doing the radio news at midnight in the BBC, and Robin Walsh was the news editor, and he invited me in. There was some guy called Alan, somebody, who was over from BBC Newsroom in London. And so they brought me in and they gave me a whiskey. And then they asked me, what do you think of the BBC? And I decided to be honest. I said, it's really disgraceful what you did the other night. But what was that? I said, you went on for 20 minutes about some old boy from the royal family. And then as a throwaway, you said 18 soldiers had died in Northern Ireland. Where's the balance in that? Is there a priority here? Is there are members of the royal family more important than 18 soldiers? The worst British loss in Northern Ireland? I don't understand it.
And they didn't sack you?
No.
They didn't sack.
Well, I went for another whiskey.
How I got into the BBC baffles me, right? Because I got a letter from the BBC. I'd applied for a job. And the letter came, and it said in it, if you could just make yourself available for a board at 2 o'clock. But it didn't say what date. So I phoned, and in those days, the personnel department was in London, right? I'd been out and had a few sherbets at lunchtime, as was the fashion in the newsletter in those days. So I phoned, and the girl in the personnel department told me, very sorry about that. It's on Friday, whatever the date was. That was like a week away. And I said, I'm not going to be in the country. Which is technically true. I was going to Donegal for a wee break.
Whoa, you're still in the country. Whoa.
Yeah, but to them British, that's what I was technically telling the truth. Anyway, so the girl said to me, I said, well, how can we deal with this? And she said, well, you could be considered in your absence. And I said, no, that's not very acceptable. Well, you could withdraw. And I said, oh, fuck me. I said, I'm not withdrawn. No. Yeah. And because I used the F word, she hung up. Oh. So I phoned back, and she answered the phone, and I said, can I speak to your boss, please? And I went through the same rigmarole with him, and he told me I could be considered in my absence or I could withdraw. And I used the F word again, and he hung up. I don't know what I'm doing here. So I phoned him back, and I said, don't you ever hang up on me again if I use the F word, okay? And I hung up. And then I phoned the BBC in Belfast, and I got the deputy editor, a man called Richard Eyre, and Richard said, I'll sort this out. The personnel department in London is not very good.
Very sensitive, are they?
Yeah. So he phoned back and said, Robin Walsh, the news editor's on holiday, but he'll come in on Thursday, if you can be here on Thursday. The only thing is there's a wee written test and you've not to tell anybody about it. And I said, I won't be speaking to anyone. So I came in to the BBC, sat in reception. Paisley walked past me on the way out of the building. This man came running breathlessly down the stairs, shook Paisley's hand, and then asked where was this boy Moore. And so the receptionist pointed me out. He took me up. We did the interview. And in the interview, Robin Walsh said, say it's 10 to 12 on a Saturday night and you get a statement in from the Reverend Ian Paisley. What do you do with it? I said, well, if it's not going to lead to any violence or somebody being attacked, I would use it, but I would attribute it to him, obviously. And during the answer, I called Paisley, the Reverend Ian Paisley, first time, and then I called him Dr. Paisley. And he said, oh, we don't recognise Dr. Paisley. We in the second reference, we call him Mr. Paisley. And I said, well, that's the newsletter. I said, but ask him what he called him when he shook his hands half an hour ago down in reception. Pointing at his deputy editor, who then, red-faced, had to turn to his boss and say, yeah, I called him Dr. Paisley. I said, I rest my case.
He'd a doctorate from the Bob Jones University, isn't it?
That's exactly
the
right.
Reverend Ian Paisley, late of this parish. So you got the job in the BBC.
I got the job.
Then you moved to UTV. When we first came in contact, came in contact with you, but you know we were involved, and one of your major achievements is bringing down a government, and possibly bringing down the Catholic Church in Ireland. And most people don't have that on their CV, but technically you did bring down the government, brought down the Irish government over the paedophile priest scandal, namely Brendan Smyth, which you did a UTV doc. What was the UTV?
Yes, it was UTV. We normally see, as you know, we're associated with comedy, but every time we work with you, it's not comedy.
It's very fucking serious, Chris.
Yeah, exactly.
It was the UTV documentary was the one that blew the
Betrayal of Trust.
And then Betrayal of Trust was the book.
Yes.
And then we
did the drama.
Yes. And you did a great job, I have to say, except one criticism. I've really got pissed off with this.
Was the guy playing you not Hampson enough?
No, he was good. His choice of shirts was appalling. When in the name of heavens did I ever wear a bloody Hawaiian shirt?
Oh, right.
Never. Manchester United shirts, yes, but no.
But this was quite serious. Obviously, Brendan Smyth, paedophile priest, uncovered 1993. When did the documentary go out?
94.
94.
Yeah.
And it was the first paedophile priest scandal in Ireland, effectively, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first one to get publicity, and I'll tell you what made the difference, and that was the very simple fact that the people who had suffered and the families that had suffered through Brendan Smyth's paedophilia, they finally got fed up asking the church to deal with the paedophile. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they'd known for 40 years that he was...
The church,
Yeah, that he was interested in molesting children. And so when they got to the end of their tether, they spoke up, albeit that quite a few of them were in silhouette, and we used false names. But it was the first time that people had given... Oh,
they were
absolutely.
extremely brave. Now,
yes.
We know the people you're talking, they're still anonymous and all of that, but they did enough. They were the ones who basically said...
Yes.
Kept chasing the Catholic Church and saying, this is the paedophile priest. What are you doing about him? What are you doing? And they covered up and covered up and covered up, and they finally lost their...
They lost the girl. And I was speaking to them the other day. I mean, they're still... the woman's just entered her 81st year. And the father of the children, he actually turned his concerns and his loathing of what had happened to his children to become a counsellor. He went away and got proper qualifications, educational qualifications, and became a counsellor for 6 or 7 years. He's a marvellous man.
Yeah. Probably one of the bravest things the family did was to trust us to write. Yes. Because, I mean, we were coming from the background of, you know, we were the funny guys, you know, we do that funny show, you know, but, I mean, you were instrumental in persuading them to talk to us.
But listen, from the very I don't know why this was. Why did I trust you? There must have been some reason. Yes. But anyway, no, it was unusual to see you in that light. But I was very impressed. I mean, I went down one day to the Custom House Square when you were filming there. And I was absolutely amazed at the conviction, not only of yourselves, but of the actors. Yeah. And the actors were brilliant. I mean, the man who played Brendan Smyth, I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. Ian Beattie. I mean, he apparently put on weight deliberately so he would look. I mean, he looked.
Do you know
evil.
what was bizarre? He got some criticism for that. People said, "Oh, he looked too much like a paedophile." Like the family and everybody around him was going, "That's exactly what he was like."
They said he was over the top. Wow. And I've always defended that by saying no, because I've spoken to the family and they said that's exactly the way he was. Like,
yeah,
you know,
he was very good at it. He was very good.
So you had the documentary, you had the book. We were very, very proud. Genuinely, one of the proudest moments in our career is when we wrote the script and the family came back and said, "Yep, felt happy with that." And it's still available online, probably. But
I watched it the other day because I found it by accident online. Yeah.
The BBC paid for it.
BBC paid for it.
Never repeated it. RTE have repeated it 3 times.
Wow.
You know, but just for people who don't remember, this case literally brought down the government because eventually Father Brendan Smyth was on the run and he was extradited from the south of Ireland to the north of Ireland. Eventually. When Cardinal Cahill Daly basically gave him up after all sorts of shenanigans, he was convicted, and then this kind of lifted the rock on what was underneath because he was the first of hundreds, wasn't he? And because of the whole extradition issue about whether or not he should have been sent to the north, there was a big scandal down south, and it caused the collapse of Albert Reynolds.
Albert Reynolds in
1994,
and the wheeler
in the middle of the peace process as well.
It was.
So you brought down a government, I think.
Well, I remember people saying that. I said I didn't bring down the government. The people who brought down the government are the Catholic Church. Because they abused their authority and their power. I think that the good thing that's happened is that there's less authority from the Catholic Church now in how the Republic of Ireland is run. Before that, I mean, if you remember the mother and baby scandal, Dr. Noel Brown, I had the privilege of meeting him in Galway, and him and his wife. And, he suffered greatly because he produced this, basically what was going to be the Republic's National Health Service. It was basically that, and it was stopped because the Catholic Church didn't like the idea of how women were going to be regarded and how marriage and babies were going to be. And look at what's happened. Yeah. Look at the disgraceful attitudes that the church had to women who were pregnant and having babies and who weren't married. My God, the pain and the suffering that's still been. Let me tell you, after the Brendan Smyth programme was aired, a man came from Australia to see me in UTV, and we sat in the UTV canteen, and he told me that he had been born out of wedlock down in Dublin, and they sent him to Bernardo's in Derry because Bernardo's in Derry had access to the child migration scheme that Britain operated with Australia. And he got put in a boat and sent to Australia. And whilst he was in Australia, he was staying with the Christian Brothers, and they lived in tents at the time. And what they did was they built these there was 3 campuses, if you like, in Australia. And the one that he was in, they built these edifices in which they would live and in which there would be a school and a home. And during that time, he was physically and sexually assaulted by the brothers, and as were many boys. And he said to me, he went on to be a teacher. He then challenged the Catholic Church to tell him, did he have a mother that was alive? Mm-hmm. Did he have any siblings? And eventually it went to the highest court in the land in Australia. And the highest court ordered the Catholic Church to tell this man if he had family alive anywhere in the world. And the Catholic Church took 6 months to hand over they had to be threatened another time by the court. And eventually they handed over the documents that he had been campaigning for years to see. And unfortunately, during that 6-month delay, his mum, his birth mum, had died in Ireland. And he came over and he met his siblings. And they exist to this day as a family. But he was absolutely horrified by the fact that the Catholic Church withheld that information, and then he never met his birth mother.
That's just one story of thousands.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I ask you, did it take a personal toll on you investigating all this stuff? I mean, it's kind of...
I did.
It's kind of, child abuse, and you're dealing with power, you're dealing with, again, what your work is, you've got your UTV and various people, and you're going off investigating bishops, and you were in Rome, and you were all over the place. I mean, it's quite traumatic stuff you're dealing with. It's quite...
Do you know the most dramatic thing, though, is when I left UTV at one stage, I left because we had a disagreement between us about an Irish swimmer who cheated. In the
That's another story.
Yeah.
Michelle Smith de Bruin.
Yeah, Michelle. Anyway,
She's still got her medals, hasn't she? Anyway, that's another podcast. That's another podcast.
And she's now a barrister.
Yes, she's now a barrister. Yes, okay.
In the name of God. Anyway, I left and I went to the Sunday World, and I always regarded it as I just needed to get out of UTV because of the smell of, just the bad smell that the whole thing about Michelle left. I wasn't in the Sunday World, mind you, for 2 weeks until she was caught with whiskey where it shouldn't have been, in a raw state. And so I managed to finish it and get the film out. But in the meantime, my work at the Sunday World continued with women coming to me and asking for help with their own children because they had discovered that their children had been sexually assaulted. Now, this wasn't priests any longer. This, for example, was a woman from the North Coast whose child was collected every day in one of those yellow buses because they were educationally...
Special needs, we say now, but in those days it was educationally subnormal.
I was trying,
it's ridiculous, that's I know it sounds awful, but that's what they used to be. Yeah.
So, but this poor boy was physically handicapped, but he was being sexually assaulted by the driver of the bus, and so that sort of thing. I felt that I owed it to people who had a problem. If they wanted to talk to me, I warned them. I said, I'm not a qualified counsellor. I can listen to what you say, and I can maybe advise you where you need to go, or help you get there. But I'm not the saviour for your child or for your. But please come and see me. And I felt that I owed it to people because of what had happened with the Brendan Smyth story, the books. I didn't want to turn my back. The consequence of all of that was that when my first grandchild was born, and she would come to stay with me and my then wife, and one point my wife said to me, how come you never change the nappies? And I said, I can't. I've listened to too much very intimate detail about how women were abused. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can't do it. And she said, you need help, because it's in here. And now, unlike the police who work in that area, they are only allowed to work in in that area for 2 years, and then they have to move on.
Get a break, yeah.
And they get counselling. I had no counselling, but I did get some counselling. I went to someone, and I stopped doing stories for a time. And the day that I stopped was the day when a woman came to the Sunday World and she told me a horrific story, and she went home to get some papers and come back. And I went to the editor at the time, Jim Madone, and I said, I can't deal with this anymore. Somebody else is going to have to help this woman. Mm-hmm. And that stopped it. But it only stopped it until I realised, you can't stop, because the rights of children are still being abused physically and mentally and sexually. It's the mental damage that's done that's really offensive. They are not the same people. They become. I'll tell you, there were a couple of boys who went to a Roubaix. It was run by the Christian Brothers. It was near Portaferry, right that way. And in the summertime, they would be volunteered to go and pick spuds up, right? And one of them said, to this day, the smell of coins makes me think of abuse, because they would get 6 pennies or something, and coinage does, or it did then. I remember the smell of coins, but he would hand over 6 pennies to the brother, one of the abusers, and he would get 2 back. That would be his contribution. But another boy who went to the same place said it was the smell of freshly cut grass did it for him. We're not aware of these triggers.
Yeah.
But it's frightening when you think
of it. People still suffering trauma decades afterwards,
Well, can I bring you back to 1980? Right? On another story, of course, which you're working away doing re-reporting on the Troubles, and they're raging away, and then you get a call to go up and report on a boys' home called Kincora. That there's allegations of that 3 members of staff have been abusing the children there. That was your first. That was my first investigation with Kincora. And my first involvement with Kincora. Now, I only joined the BBC in August 27th, 1979, and this was in January 1980, and I had quickly resolved that when I joined the BBC, I was determined I don't need to go on camera. Like on day 2 in the BBC, the editor got in and he lifted my hair up, because I was quite long hair, and he said, where is the earring? He was at this ear. I said, no, it's on this side. And he said, you can't go on television with that earring. And I said, well, I wasn't planning to be on television, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take it out when I have to go in front of the camera, and I'll put it back in again when I'm finished, if that's okay. And that was the arrangement. So I quickly resolved I did not want to be a sub-editor in the BBC Newsroom. I wanted to get out of there, and I became a reporter. I went for the job. And so that this story about Kincora
came up. What's interesting, sorry to interrupt there, we spoke, Dan and the guys behind who help us here, they're very, very nice guys, and we've mentioned the word Kincora, and I go, well, never heard of it. And I go, people of a certain age, but it was late 70s, early 80s. This was a scandal that bubbled under and kind of never really went away. And now you've released a book, which is your 45 years of investigating. 45 years you're investigating with Kincora.
Kincora was massive at the time. And I'm not being facetious, but I went to a Catholic school, and when Kincora broke, we went, sure. No surprise there. That's what the broads are. That's what the broads get up to. You wouldn't see our lot doing that type of thing.
It was a big shock.
It was a shock. So basically, the initial thing I remember was Ian Paisley was involved, and there was a boys' home, Kincora, up the Newtonards Road, just off the Newtonards Road in East Belfast, and basically it was orphans and boys in care went to this home, and they were abused by a couple of people, including Mr. McGrath or something, who were eventually convicted in the early. And it was a bit of a big scandal because there were loyalist paramilitaries involved. There were Ian Paisley was involved. He was implicated at one stage. Well,
he was implicated in knowing about it before the story. Knowing about it long before the story broke.
It's in full detail in Chris's new book before I libel anybody.
Kincora.
Where I libel anybody. Kincora, Britain shame. But this is now encompasses all sorts of things. It's not just loyalist paramilitaries. It's Britain shame and Lord Louis Mountbatten, who we go back to, who was murdered in 1979.
Yes.
There's a connection there.
Well, things have changed dramatically since the Irish Independent on the 24th of January 1980 did a story on the front page about a boys' home in Belfast. Didn't name it. But it didn't take long that morning to find out that it was called Kincora. And it started relatively straightforward. What's going to happen? By April, the 3 men who were employed there were suspended. They were arrested. They were charged with offences because the police quickly established that there was a case to answer. And not only that, their investigations took them to other homes in Belfast. And so 6 men appeared in court in December 1981. They were all convicted, but there was a wee bit of excitement in the court because one of the 6, a man called William McGrath, whom...
He's the housemaster.
He was the house father. Yeah. He was the 3rd man. He joined in 1970. The other 2 had been there basically from it opened. The hostel opened in 1958. And McGrath was a fascinating character because he was a religious fanatic. He was a bigot. He was sectarian in his views. He hated the Catholic Church and wanted united Ireland but under the British flag. He was a strange mix of a man. And he had all these different compartments of his life. He was associated with the UVF in the beginning. He was associated with his own little paramilitary group called Tara. He was in the Orange Order. He had his own Orange Lodge in which they had an Irish language was used on the banner. You know, so this was interesting, and it should have finished when the 6 of them were convicted and jailed in December 1981. But I had a policeman, the man who led the investigation, George Caskey. Mm-hmm. He and I had a friendship that began at the White Tapes, where I would be as a news reporter about a bombing or a shooting.
Yeah.
And so George phoned me one night, February, after the court case finished in December 81. In February 82, he phoned me and he asked to meet me in a car park at midnight. And the car park was, as it happens, I didn't know where he lived, but it was near my home, and it was also near his home. And at this stage, he said, "Chris, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because the ruffles, the feathers that are being ruffled are not in Belfast. They're in London, MI5. Right. He told me. And he told me the MI5 were obstructing his investigation. That's all he said. He said, "I'll tell you about it at another time when it's appropriate, but keep going." And that was the encouragement that I got after the trial that everybody thought would finish.
That's it, yeah.
And
well, look, we've read the book. It's available now. It's a fascinating. It brings in MI5, Lord Mountbatten. Some people would go, "Chris, come on, Boys Home, 1980s, 70s. What are you banging on about that for? What's the relevance here in 2025?" It's still been covered up.
Yes, that is the relevance. And I mean, when you consider that in the build-up to the latest inquiry, there have been 7 inquiries into Kincora. 3 of them were police inquiries, and then there was 4 so-called public inquiries, but they weren't public at all because MI5 in 1983 persuaded the government not to have an inquiry that could compel MI5 papers and MI5 personnel. So the inquiry we got in 1983 was the Judge William Hughes inquiry, which was a watered down inquiry. It didn't look at the activities of the police or MI5. And it's the MI5 link to Kincora which has kept the story alive.
Now, just to be clear, McGrath always claimed to know more than he was letting on, and claimed to be an agent,
yes,
a British agent,
but
and had that connection to it. And that's where the connection between MI5 and Kincora goes, because they were aware of what was happening in the home. They were using the home in order to manipulate various politicians and loyalist paramilitaries and things like that. We have to speculate about that because there's no one. I mean, there's nobody in MI5 is going to give me a wee bit of paper with a signature on it saying, "No, this is what we did." That's kind of the.
Well,
you're absolutely right.
That's a flavour of how
they're
the
probably
theory
listening in, Chris. So maybe we can ask them.
But what is? I mean, this is the main thing. I mean, I think this is what jumps out of the book, the Mountbatten thing. What is the connection between Lord Louis Mountbatten of Burma and Kincora Boys Home in East Belfast in the 70s?
Right, here's what the connection is. There are 5 boys who claim that they've been sexually abused by Mountbatten. I've spoken to 4 of them. The 5th boy I can't speak to because he's dead. And he jumped off a boat. Stephen Waring, right? But as recently as 2 months ago, I found another boy living just across the border in the Republic, not far from Enniskillen. And he confirmed that he had been sexually abused by Mountbatten, but whilst he was in a care home in London.
Right.
So one of the other people that told me about it is Richard Kerr. Richard Kerr, unfortunately, is a very damaged individual. He's gone through a lot in life. He was sexually abused, first of all, in a home called Williamson House by an Anglican monk called Eric Witchell. Witchell was known to Joe Mains, who was the warden who was responsible for running Kincora. Yeah. They shared information about boys. George Caskey told me that there was never any evidence of a paedophile ring. Yes, there was, paedophiles were sharing information and there was exchange of information about boys. But Kerr tells a different story. Kerr tells a story about a paedophile ring in which he was taken out of Kincora, and in 2014 he phoned me from Dallas and said, I wanted to talk to you. And I was amazed because I tried to get him in 1983 and missed him by a few weeks because he was in Preston living with an aunt. Anyway, he and I got together. He was very slowly told me a little bit. He didn't gush it all out. He was afraid of the British authorities. And so it's only in the last year that he's opened up and talked about him and Stephen Waring being driven by Joe Mains to a place close to the border, where he says Mountbatten's staff arrived in 2 cars and took them away to the castle in Classiebawn Castle.
Chris, can I just normally this podcast is a bit more lighthearted. This is very heavy. I'm not being facetious. I'm saying, listen, people should read the book. I've read the book. It's fascinating stuff. What do you hope to achieve by? What would you like to happen as a result of it?
Well, the British government and MI5 have hidden files away until 2065 and 2085. I have no reason to understand have been given no reason to understand what the hell's going on. And, you know, the latest inquiry, every inquiry that's taken place, has been safely done where MI5 are not held to account. Okay? So MI5 have a lot to answer for. We've got paperwork now that shows that MI5 were operating a larger intelligence gathering system, that they had their agent, informant, Willie McGrath in Kincora. He was important because he was linked to all these fellow paedophiles who were politicians here. He was very closely linked to Paisley. In fact, he was a member of Paisley's church. His 2 children were married in Paisley's church. And yet Paisley said, he didn't have any connection with this man. So the latest inquiry was, the latest whitewash, should I say, was the HIA inquiry, the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry, which was set up to look at all the institutions, the public institutions that suffered from allegations of child sex abuse. And they touched briefly on Kincora. But again, look, here's the kind of document that you get from the Kincora inquiry, and where he says that it wasn't until 1977, Hart says in his report in 2017, it wasn't until 1977 that the MI5 knew what was going on in Kincora. Here's an MI5 memo dated the 4th of April 1972, and it says in it that McGrath is reported to have been involved in assaulting small boys. Right. Now, if they had any interest in finding out what was going on, they could have gone to the police and asked. The police had been to Kincora to investigate allegations of sex abuse going back to the 60s.
I should say, though, just this isn't just you and your theories here. I mean,
No.
I mean, you go on the internet and you just put in Mountbatten Kincora, you're going to get a lot of stuff. But there's other journalists, other respected journalists. There is accredited historians such as Andrew Lowney, who did the biography of the Mountbattens, who say there's a case to answer. So it's not just Chris Moore saying this. There is
it's not.
It's out there, isn't it?
It is out there. And I travelled to Australia with a television company called Alleycats to interview a man who'd been in Kincora in
Arthur Smyth.
Arthur Smyth. Now, the strange thing is, Arthur Smyth was able to work out when he was in Kincora by the fact that he wasn't going to school, and it wasn't until he left Kincora he got a school uniform and he went to Orangefield School.
But Arthur Smyth says that he was abused by Mountbatten
in
Kincora, isn't that
in Kincora.
Yeah.
And it was the same year that Richie Kerr and Stephen Waring were transported down, the same summer.
Yeah.
And also in the same summer, in 77, a boy who's in Andrew Lowney's book called Ahmad.
Yes.
Right? I know him from talking to Kerr. I've seen photographs of him. He was also being brought in that year, in the summer of 1977. I was able to look up, thanks to the work that Andrew Lowney did, I was able to look up the Southampton University diaries, the Mountbatten diaries, and I was able to confirm that Mountbatten was in Ireland as normal at Mullaghmore for the month of August. And on the 4th to the 7th of August, I think that was the dates, he was in Northern Ireland.
And that was the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee.
And that was the year of the Queen's.
Celebrate, which wasn't that August 77?
Yes.
Royal Yacht Britannia is
yes.
So there's been it was like a particularly memorable time.
Yes.
August.
There's one other thing. Ed Maloney pointed out when we talked recently. Ed said, if you look back at the history of the British Secret Services, when it was first established as one service, its principal aim was to safeguard the head of the royal family. The royalty was their raison d'etre, and that's how they came into being. And that is still their priority. So keep them safe. It's kind of like watching the Catholic Church protect the good name of the church by lying and covering up. Well, the British are doing the same thing with Kincora and their involvement. You know, I can understand why you have to have a Secret Service and why they operate. Can I just read the last words of my book?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I'll tell you something. It is... Here's how I finished the book, and I will tell you, if I can just put my glasses on.
Put your glasses on, Chris.
I'll
Right.
put mine on as well. Go.
Having been involved in investigating this story since it first broke in 1980, it seems to me as if MI5 and its cohorts in the police believe they could do what they wanted with little or no regard for the truth, the law, or democracy. MI5 kept secret its interest in Kincora from the police. It somehow persuaded the government to bury Kincora files until 2065 and 2085. It quelled investigations into Kincora so that its links to the hostel would remain secret. And yet it failed to do the most important thing in this case. It failed to save the boys in Kincora from sodomy and sexual violence. It seems that for MI5, regnum defend, defence of the realm, the agency's motto, was more important than defending those who could not defend themselves.
Chris, thank you very much. The book is now on sale. I would thoroughly recommend it. We have read it. I would, the very best. Look, can you? This is can you relax now and take it easy now that it's done and it's out there? And can you take it easy and worry about Manchester United's form next season and Mr. Amarin and all of that? Can you do that? Or is this going to? I mean, this has been 40 years of your life, more 45 years of your life. You know.
I'm happy to get rid of it.
You're happy to get rid of it. Well,
but I await the truth.
Yeah.
And the problem is, I don't know what the truth is, even after all these years. You know, but the people who know the truth, the book will reveal the many and varied ways in which the British state and MI5 covered up what they were doing that linked them to Kincora.
Chris, we wish you all the very best of it, and thank you for trusting coming into this. Well, you know, we're normally light-hearted and all that, but
yes.
you know, but this is a very important story, and we're happy to support it. And
thank
wish
you very
all
much.
the very best with the book. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, slightly heavier episode of the Give My Head podcast, but that's fine. That's what we do. We do comedy. We do light with politicians and all sorts of things. But we're absolutely delighted to have Chris on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Moore. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, boys. Thank you.